Hey guys, I've waited like another minute or two so people start tuning in. Jump on, let's get on this. As you guys know, I've done a lot of work on Venezuela, the situation leading up to it, the history of that continent. So, a day that I knew would come is now here. All right. All right, give it one more minute here. All right. Actually, just leave it like this. Looks like a grenade. I love this thing. All right, let's get started. So we have finally the United States has engaged in a land attack against the nation of Venezuela. And this is something that saw coming for a long time. As you may be aware or may not be aware, I have done a lot of work on this country and this situation. As you know, we have started off with the campaign in the Caribbean, in which we have engaged in the unlawful use of military force against what are constitute civilians under the law of armed conflict. And we've started off from that point in what was supposed to be a counter-narcotics campaign and dealing with the so-called, drug issues coming from Venezuela, which is actually not true, to now going to a full-blown war. As we see across the nation tonight in that country, we have a broad bombing campaign in the city of Caracas, and an unmistakable strike package intended to presumably decapitate the Maduro regime. If we see right now, we have everything, and I'm getting a little bit caught up now because I had to deal with some technical issues a little bit here, but we have Chinook helicopters, as you see on your screen right now, flying in. Those are not going to be used for anything other than ferrying troops and equipment. There's precision bombing attacks, presumably cruise missiles and airstrikes. But there are definitely going to be ground troops of some nature on the ground. Probably special operations forces. Whether they're going after Maduro or not it's not clear at this time, obviously. Now, let's talk about that real quick. It's very important. There has never been a successful regime change in the history of modern warfare using air power alone. And that is why the best defense for Venezuela would have been something akin to what the Houthis did, and that is sit, absorb the punishment. This is a huge country. It's larger than the size of Germany and has 25 million people. And beyond its geographical size, the terrain, lots of hills, beaches, but jungle. As you may be aware, may not be aware, Central and South America have revealed themselves to be able to hide large armies in the jungles pretty much indefinitely. It's obviously something we dealt with in Vietnam, but you look at the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, FARC, FARC, they recently reached a peace deal with the government, but it took decades and decades, even with U.S. help, to bring them to the negotiating table. So this is not a country that you're going to easily invade, take, and hold territory. What you're going to be doing is targeted against special operations, because the amount of soldiers it would take to do this, to actually invade Venezuela and hold it, 250,000 plus, 150,000 plus. So right now, looking at this video, Chinook helicopters, so there's approximately 15,000 total soldiers in the Caribbean right now, approximately 100 combat aircraft. There are some F-35s, about 10, maybe up to a squadron in Puerto Rico. This is, Puerto Rico is well within range, obviously. We have plenty of aerial refueling assets. So aircraft are not a problem. The question is, really for me, is what the Maduro regime has done to protect themselves from small raids by special operations forces. Layered against this, of course, you have to think about the intelligence picture. I'm watching this on the outside. I do have some sources, some in Venezuela, some in Trinidad and Tobago, and some other places around there. Don't want to talk about that too much. But these are not people who are going to know, obviously, the full intelligence picture. So there could be somebody inside the Maduro regime. I think he's got a huge bounty on his head. He's at $40 or $50 million right now. They could have somebody who's been compromised, whether it's a general, whether it's someone in his security, his personal protective detail, who could have given our military the intelligence they need to go in and just snatch this guy. So so that's always like a backdrop that we don't know about, and when you see an operation like this. Now, obviously, comparing this to Manuel Noriega, this is a much bigger country. Their military ground forces approximately 100,000, or sorry, total military approximately 100,000, and they have around 200,000 of these. I don't know if you'd even call them National Guard, but civilian militia types. So again, enough. Again, if we were going to invade, take and hold territory, that'd be a very difficult proposition. Obviously, we could do it, but that'd be a long-term involved situation. So, assuming they have good intelligence, assuming they know where Maduro is, that's really the question, and that's going to evolve over the next 24, 48, 72 hours. We're going to know right away, because if Maduro is able to get out of the city, get into the jungle, it's going to be very difficult to really decapitate his regime. The other situation you think about too is if they're able to effectively force Maduro from this seat of power, that may have the same result. Meaning, if he's not sitting in in the presidential palace or whatever, if he's not showing up on TV, and he's being turned basically into someone who has to run and go hide, that creates conditions for either a popular uprising or someone else to take over from beneath him. But again, I think people need to understand the history of Venezuela. They think, oh, it's a small, it's a country in South America, poor. But the history of regime change in Venezuela has been a very difficult one. I believe there have been at least three, yes, there's been 3+1 attempt at regime change in that country since 1992. Every single one has failed, including those that resulted from a popular vote, and including those that involved a charismatic and admittedly very talented politician in Hugo Chavez. Now, I say talented not because I agree with him or I think he's a good person, but he had charisma. He was a paratrooper. He had broad popular support, and people may not be aware of this. He won every one of his elections free, fair, to an extent, meaning the elections themselves weren't infected with fraud like you see in somewhere like Russia. He was actually voted for. Now, whether he's able to maintain his grip on power because of anti-democratic measures, that's obviously another question. But even when Hugo Chavez, I believe in was it 1992 or 96, attempted a coup as someone who came from inside the country, popular support, charismatic leader, and the conditions were ripe because at that point there had been multiple severe recessions in the economy. So in about the 1950s, there was an overthrow of the government, and then they had this period of oligarchs basically feigning democracy but not actual democracy, and two parties sharing power up until around 96, 98 when Hugo Chavez, he had attempted a coup in 96. I believe in 98 is when he actually won a popular election. Now, a little bit hazy on these numbers, somewhat, but the rough time frame is accurate. So Chavez was not able to overthrow the government and have a coup, even when the conditions were ripe and he was a popular leader. And he famously said when he gave up on his coup, "I'm done for now." And he was able to come back. But then you had him, that initial one. Then you had later on, I believe it was, we're thinking 2016, 2018. We had another one that was actually sponsored by the United States. And that one was under, we actually helped install someone in a coup. And within 48 hours, he had already been redeposed by the military, because the guy we put in, actually, his first act when we put him in was to dissolve the Constitution and the Supreme Court and the legislature. So, I mean, that kind of backfired. And then you had Operation Gideon, which was a complete shit show in 2018, when you had some U.S. Army former special operators, guys well over the hill. After there was an election stolen by Maduro, this is after Chavez had passed from cancer, and that failed miserably. A few of them got captured. The guy behind that, Joshua Gaudreau, I believe is his name, used to do security at Trump rallies and is very good friends with Trump's head of security. So some connection there, loosely. So that's what we're dealing with. A nation that is very resistant to having coup attempts, to being overthrown. And I think that backdrop is important for people to understand. It is in the midst of a huge refugee crisis. It is the worst refugee crisis in modern history, in the 20th century forward, really, that did not involve a war. So let's go through kind of like the list. You have Venezuela has the largest number of displaced persons, refugees. Next is Ukraine and Syria, basically tied, although Syria, obviously people are coming back now because Assad has been deposed. The collapse of the healthcare system, that's another concern because you have 7 million plus unvaccinated people who have swamped the healthcare systems in Brazil and as well in Colombia. Then you have an unvaccinated population all across, obviously, Colombia. There are some horrific stories, and obviously I done a lot of work on this. As you've probably seen on my channel and stuff, but horrific stories about what it's like for women to get pregnant and try to give birth inside Venezuela. They basically go from hospital to hospital and die from easily preventable conditions. And so that's a concern with this. Are the people going to flee and, further saturate the healthcare systems and the public services in surrounding countries? Just wanted to give that backdrop and that history because these are all like key factors to understand. Furthermore, when you're talking about the next day impact, it's one thing to depose a regime. It is a entirely different thing to plan for the day after. Think about our issues in the global war on terrorism and especially in Iraq. These institutions need to be rebuilt. Something like 30,000, more than 50 to 70% of the doctors in Venezuela have fled over the past, let's see here, 15 years. The healthcare system, again, is completely destroyed. And what does that make you think of? USAID. They are the institution building mechanism and rebuilding mechanism of our government. Incredibly dedicated people. And that's important because guess what? As you may remember, or as you may have seen on Twitter over the past few days, there was an individual who posted about, the so-called alleged fraud in the Somali daycare community, the Nick Shirley video. And there was this thing going around claiming, on right-wing channels, that Somali daycares or daycares in this community had given like $30 million in political donations, but they weren't actually donations. It was the amount of federal grants given, to a state like Minnesota and millions and millions of people in a large metropolitan area in Minneapolis, St. Paul. And that was immediately proven to be false. Community noted. And then the guy who posted that, of course, a fucking, a fake profile photo account, a coward, and never actually stand up for what they believe in and come out with it, said, "Oh, I lied, but who cares? So what? We're not playing by the rules anymore." I mean, it was just infantile, just complete BS. Guy puts out something to demagogue and denigrate a particular community, gets caught, and then flails like, who cares? I'm just going to keep lying. Now, why I'm talking about this is because there's an account called Data Republican. You may be aware of this person. Data Republican is someone who proposes the most disgusting and awful, complete BS, total lies, defamatory crap about USAID. Someone who worked with Doge and someone who actually worked to help destroy and dismantle USAID. Now, if you look at Nicholas Kristof with a K from the New York Times, he's done fantastic work on showing thousands, hundreds of thousands, potentially millions of people that are mathematically certain to be killed by this. This ridiculous dismantling of USAID, which actually didn't save us money, it actually cost us money. Well, So what we're going to be facing in Venezuela, if regime change is successful, is the inability to rebuild, tied back to the very same right-wing Elon Musk, hate USAID and blame them for, every problem in the world, ecosystem. And I'm sure they're the one cheerleading this attack. That group of people on the far right are doing that. And yet they're the ones who undermined the ability to actually make this attack and any regime change, if that is successful, actually work long term. Little rant there. Okay, let's go back and look at the kind of current situation. Yeah, these are big airstrikes here. And again, I don't know what the planning is behind this, as far as what intelligence we have about where Maduro is, what ties we have with the Venezuelan community or potential groups there, as to a day after plan and coordination. But we're all in now. I mean, this is it. So, let's look at this here. Okay. Looks like there's a ground stop at the airport in San Juan, Puerto Rico, in the United States airport. All right. Okay, so they're hitting the port too. Everything we destroy is going to have to be rebuilt after regime change. Just something to keep in mind. Yep. Now, it's a little surprising to me that they have. So we've got. They call it U.S. Marine Corps AH-1Z, but that's the Cobra helicopter that has its lineage back to Vietnam. There he's, looks like he's got unguided rockets that's firing. Helicopters can be a little bit vulnerable to ground fire. This obviously has some armor plating, but, there's a risk there, as we saw in the war in Ukraine in the early days. Here we go. Yeah. So those are unguided rockets. All right, so. Now, when we're looking at this, I mean, there has been a big buildup. There's about 20% of our entire Navy is in the Caribbean theater of operations. But again, this is a big country, and you can see here. I mean, this picture really says a lot. What you see here is all those plumes of smoke. One thing to pay attention to is you look at, they're roughly the same size, meaning simultaneous impacts. Obviously, the only few militaries in the world can do that. Okay, so. Okay, this is so stupid. This whole thing about Kalshi. Kalshi's like Polymarket, where they like bet on war and stuff. The last people you should listen to in this situation. It looks like they hit an arms depot here. Yeah. So those are secondary explosions from an ammo dump. Yeah. And again, Venezuela would not fight this war, and they're not going to stand toe to toe with the United States. So if their radar stations get blown up or their fighter jets, that's not the point. I mean, the only way Maduro is going to survive is to sit back like the Houthis and try to force a land invasion and to avoid targeted special operations raids. If he can avoid that, then he's actually going to be, that's going to make things a lot more difficult. Although, again, it might make him more vulnerable as well. because he can't have the appearance of having his grip on power. All right. Now, I think it's kind of all right. So we've got this first. Let me see here. Situation. Now we really don't have. I don't see that we have a statement from the president as to what the scope of this is. That initial thing from Jennifer Jacobs, CBS News, is that. Let me just read it. The Trump administration officials are aware of reports of explosions in aircraft over Venezuela's capital, Caracas, early this morning. Sources tell CBS News. No official comment yet. Okay, well, then they were talking about airstrikes. This is a lot more than airstrikes. This is like we have ground troops in there right now. Okay, now we have a list here, CBS News, of the targets that were struck. It looks like locations hit in U.S. strikes in Venezuela: Fuerte Tuina, a military base in Caracas, an air base in Caracas, a signal antenna, main port of Venezuela. If Venezuela has, if their military has even half a brain, all these forces are going to be dispersed. And again, go ahead, blow up. They're going to blow it. They're not going to be able to. Their military is too dilapidated to. First of all, they have Su-33s, Su-27 type airplane fighter jets that are probably barely serviceable. Their pilots don't fly regularly, which is something you have to do in order to maintain proficiency, especially when you have a total overmatch against the F-35s. I mean, they can't stand toe-to-toe with our airplanes. So there's no point in even wasting resources on that. They're going to dare a ground invasion by a lot of forces. That's it. So when you see they hit this airbase, so they blew up this airplane, or they hit this surface-to-air missile site, for how the concept of operations for the defense of this country by the Venezuelan military is likely to be drawn up, it's effectively irrelevant. Yeah. Okay, so Nicolas Maduro has declared a national emergency. I bet he has. So, yeah, I'd be really. The key is what those Chinook helicopters and what those ground forces are after and what intelligence they have. So this is interesting. Trump gave the U.S. military the green light to conduct land strikes in Venezuela days ago, U.S. officials tell CBS News. The U.S. was ready on Christmas Day, but airstrikes in Nigeria against ISIS targets took precedence, sources said. Okay, that sounded like a jet. It could just be a missile coming in. Anyways, so we're attacking Nigeria based upon the religion of the potential victims because they're Christian, while ignoring all the people in Sudan who are like entire cities again totally wiped out, like 100,000 people at a time. I'm not sure if there's an analysis at the highest levels of our government. It's really not something we should be doing, in my opinion. But it shows we're engaging into multiple military conflicts at different parts of the globe on somewhat questionable grounds. Obviously, in Nigeria, like if there's as many Muslims getting killed as there are, nearly as many Muslims getting killed as there, and sometimes more in certain areas than there are Christians. Our First Amendment says, Congress, the government basically shall make no law concerning respecting the establishment of religion. That's the Establishment Clause. That's why you can't have, prayer in public schools and things like that. So our government's really not supposed to act on the basis of religion in carrying out, its obligations both domestically and internationally. Doesn't mean they have to be blind to it, but still, this is, engaging in what kind of sounds like a religious-based motivation. I mean, the question should really be, is this international interest irrespective of religion? Is it legal? That's what we should be looking at. Additionally, I'm not sure how effective those strikes were. Then you look at Sudan, and it's hard to understand what the difference is, because if there's a so-called Christian genocide in Nigeria, which really doesn't have much evidentiary support, to be honest, there's definitely a genocide happening in Sudan. Now, when you see that the UAE is helping to fund that, Trump has a lot of business interest with the UAE and in the Middle East. That's very suspect for our credibility internationally. But interesting that he the military did not want to attack Venezuela because we were tied down somewhere else. Okay. Now, of course, it would be good for Ukraine if Russia loses Venezuela and Russia loses Iran. That's good. And make no mistake that Maduro is a bad guy. He didn't win elections. When I say that Hugo Chavez won his elections, those were internationally monitored by the Carter Center, and they were also internationally monitored by the European Union observers. Okay. Maduro is an absolute dictator, a complete scumbag, and he has totally destroyed the country, no question whatsoever. Hugo Chavez had actually doubled the GDP, almost doubled the GDP of that country, but that was because of rising oil prices. So it's a little bit misleading as he set the country up economically well, but under conditions that precipitated a later collapse when the oil prices went down. So for the people who are pro-Ukraine like myself, the overall concept of this, everything with respect to that, there's a lot we don't know, but obviously Russia losing, if they lose Iran and Venezuela, after losing Syria, that's going to be a net positive, obviously, for the world and the people who live in those countries, but likely too for Ukraine. Now, the interesting thing is, you may have heard about the story. It's in my timeline a couple hours ago. There was we've been stopping these Venezuelan tankers, these oil tankers leaving Venezuela. Well, one of them, as you may remember, Pete Hegseth was posting this glossy video of fast roping down, special forces taking this tanker, some Call of Duty whatnot. And then, but when one of those tankers over the past several days happened to be, it was leaving the same area under the same conditions. It was, subject to the same legal ability to take that tanker. The crew's like, oh, we're connected to Russia. And all of a sudden, the United States, oil tankers can go 20 miles an hour in the water, okay? These things are huge, and that thing was full, okay? So it's deep in the water, not going very fast. All of a sudden, we backed off. And the New York Times reported earlier in the week that they had said that they had a Russian crew, and the U.S. was trying to figure out what to, it's kind of weird. And now we're not so gung-ho to go up on that thing and take it over like we have everything else. Wonder why they got such special treatment. Well, that tanker now is basically admitting that it's in its communications that it's part of the Russian shadow tanker fleet, and it's already up in the North Atlantic. So that thing's gone. So obviously that indicates Putin is drawing some benefit, profit, and money for his war machine from Venezuela. Okay. Why is this AMK mapping? The guy's a total jackass. Yeah.
Hay un bombardeo. Ok, levanta Brainer.
Okay, so I think try to how to best explain this, because we have what is the legal political situation with respect to whether there needs to be a declaration of war, how this situation in the Caribbean where striking these boats has evolved, and how that plays into what we have here. So what you have, let's talk about Congress's authority on this issue and what they're supposed to be doing, or what they're supposed to have the power to do. So you have the War Powers Act, and basically anytime there's 60 days of military operations, there's supposed to be congressional approval for any further conduct of that nature by our military. Now, interestingly, Trump initially, and as part of that 60 days, within the first 48 hours after using military force, the president under the War Powers Act is required to give a notification to Congress, okay? And he did that under the War Powers Act, which is an admission that the War Powers Act applies to the boat strikes. Now, in that initial document, that initial report, he said that it was in the national self-defense. And that's why he was blowing up boats, civilians in boats. When I say civilians, I mean in the context of the Geneva Convention, the law of armed conflict, international humanitarian law. It's just different types of laws that govern the use of military force. So you have combatant, non-combatant, protected person, and like unprivileged belligerent. The rough categories. And so he said national self-defense, which requires three things. That you are about to be subject to an imminent armed attack. An armed attack doesn't mean a voluntary business transaction selling drugs. There's actually case law on this. Even a border skirmish where multiple soldiers get shot and killed by other soldiers does not constitute an armed attack, according to, again, some precedent we have on this issue. And then it requires that it's, necessity and proportionality. So armed attack, necessity, and proportionality. Those are the three things that are required for Trump's initial use of force based upon, that's his argument that was made in that notice to Congress under the War Powers Act in the first 48 hours. Notably, later on, Donald Trump said the War Powers Act does not apply. And he adopted an argument made actually by Barack Obama that was rejected by the Office of Legal Counsel at the time, and obviously so many years ago. And so now his belief is that, or his operating theory is that the War Powers Act does not apply. And they've tried to shoehorn this. And so one of the ways they got around, they tried to argue that, the reason they argue that is a statutory interpretation issue, that basically, since our soldiers are not, at risk, they're not being shot at directly, that they're not at risk, and therefore, under the language of the War Powers Act, it's not triggered. Again, that argument's been rejected. It's basically frivolous. Now, it's also factually incorrect, because if you look at the U.S. Forrestal fire, soldiers die all the time, not in combat. They die in traffic accidents. People are tired. There's lots of heavy equipment moving around. They die in explosions. They die, in training accidents. But like in the U.S. Forrestal fire, this is an aircraft carrier off the coast of Vietnam, and one of these Zuni rockets, actually similar to what one of these that Cobra helicopter was shooting, an unguided folding fin rocket, its mechanism was triggered and it shot across the deck and hit a bunch of gasoline tanks and other fueled aircraft with weapons on them. And it killed a bunch of people. It was a huge fire, almost destroyed the aircraft carrier entirely. But again, it goes to show you that even those involved in logistics way behind the front lines and not actually receiving incoming fire are at risk, and they die all the time. It's probably accurate that most of the deaths in Desert Storm did not happen in actual combat. So a pretty frivolous argument to say the War Powers Act doesn't apply. So we're in this gray area. It's not really a gray area, but they've taken that and tried to say, well, it's a counter-narcotics operation, and therefore it's not really war. Our soldiers really aren't at risk. Okay, but this is not a counter-narcotics operation. This looks like the opening part in a smaller area of the Iraq War with massive airstrikes, and not Desert Storm or not Desert Shield or Desert Storm, but in fact the later Iraq War. So this is definitely a war. It's not a counter-narcotics operation. There can be no good faith argument whatsoever. But I just wanted to, you think about it, they've said, War Powers Act applies. No, it doesn't, counter-narcotics. And now they're saying, now we're back to like just a blatant open war all over the map. Okay, so yeah. Again, this is allegedly. You got to take everything you see on here with a grain of salt right now. I mean, people are like, this account is attributing to an airstrike carried out by the United States. It says an airstrike by Navy destroyers. It's not really an airstrike. Airstrikes are by airplanes. On the general staff of the Venezuelan Armed Forces. I don't know what the basis for that is, but just something to keep in mind. But if if Venezuela, since basically Trump took office, has not been dispersing its general staff, they're idiots. Look at this right here. Yeah. All right, let's see if we've got any updates here. So here's the story about Russia filed a formal diplomatic request that the U.S. stop pursuing an oil tanker originally bound for Venezuela. Oops. Of course it got away. All right. Not much here. Okay. Yeah, this is definitely... so, just to put a cap on that final issue of legal authority and the situation, Congress needs to do some oversight immediately. This is a war. Even under the twisted theory that Trump originally tried to use. Have we heard? We don't think we've really heard from anybody in the Senate yet. See if anybody from the Senate Armed Services Committee. Yeah. Okay. But this is time they got to do something. They can't just keep sitting around. And I mean, this whole thing is they've been getting jerked around. Yeah. The Senate Armed Services Committee, according to this reporting, was not informed in advance of any potential U.S. military action carried out tonight in Venezuela. And again, like the inconsistency between this is just a drug operation. Okay, let's dismantle that, dismember that lie real quick as well. I wrote an article on my Substack. It's same username, my Substack at hisgoescobra.com, and discussed the question of whether under 18 U.S.C. 2331, which is the criminal statute for terrorism and defines terrorism as the unlawful use of violence, of force, or kidnapping, things of that nature, but basically the unlawful use of force to achieve politically coercive means, politically coercive goals, right? So you kill people, kidnap people, threaten to kill people in order to get a government to change its, policies or to coerce the civilian population. That's the definition of terrorism. And when you look at these Venezuelan boat strikes in that campaign, it's completely farcical, and it as a actual drug interdiction campaign for a number of reasons. First off, let's look at the clearest evidence of this. Number one, there have been multiple seizures of boats, one off the coast of, south of Florida, 20,000 pounds of cocaine. On that one, the Coast Guard went aboard and seized it, as they're experts in doing. Stopped the boat, seized it, and took that into custody. That's also how you build a prosecutable case. You got to take the people on that boat, flip them, go back up the chain, get the intelligence necessary to dismantle the network. If that's truly what you're trying to do. In Venezuela, they're blowing up these boats. I don't know how many kilos are on these boats, but it's not going to be anywhere near 20, like 100 pounds, maybe, something like that. Pete Hegseth, in his tweets several times, has said, we're going to treat these narco-terrorists just like Al-Qaeda. They're no different from Al-Qaeda, and we're going to treat them like Al-Qaeda. And yet, they captured two, and did they treat them like Al-Qaeda? No, they let them go. If someone can let me know the last time we caught a terrorist directly tied to who we knew it was Al-Qaeda, unquestionably, and we gave them medical care and let them go in 2 days, and that's it, didn't charge them, didn't interrogate them, and you sure as shit cannot do an effective interrogation and debrief in a matter of 2 days, especially where the people are wounded. So that's not consistent with their own words, and it's not consistent with actually trying to, again, build either a prosecutable case or get intelligence for where the network is. I mean, Venezuela is a big ass country, bigger than Germany, and it has huge, like, jungles. Jungles can hide entire armies. Look at all the problems they've had in Central America with, was it El Salvador? Look at the FARC in Colombia, as I talked about earlier. You need that intelligence to dismantle those networks, to blow up those production facilities. And they just let those people go. Another one was knocked into the water and was alive and bobbing in the ocean. Did the United States military take any effort to actually go find that guy and pull him out of the water? No, they left him to the Mexican Navy. Didn't even try to look for him. And he wasn't found, obviously drowned, perished at sea. So when you look at all that, it's just totally inconsistent with how we've done drug interdiction, how we've done the dismantling of cartel networks. And it also shows that, saying you're going to treat them like Al-Qaeda was a complete and blatant lie. So those are two easy ones to look at, factors to look at. If you're blowing up a boat with 100 kilos because it's so dangerous that you have to use military force, okay, against an unarmed person who, by the way, the very reason you're blowing up that boat and killing that person is your allegation he's engaged in a crime which actually triggers his due process. You see how that works? Triggering his due process. You're killing him for something that gives him a due process protection against extrajudicial killings. But 100 pounds, is that dangerous? Oh, I got to kill him right away. It's like a chemical weapon. These drugs, which, by the way, can't even get to the United States, and are actually going to, based on all evidence, are going to Trinidad and Tobago to be sent to go over to Europe. And the boat with 20,000 pounds, you're letting that go? That makes that's no mathematical sense. Okay, so when you look at that, the rational conclusion to draw is that they are engaged. It's a coercive activity. It's intended to intimidate Maduro. It's intended to intimidate his general staff. It's intended to intimidate and coerce the civilian population of Venezuela. And you know how we know that too? You remember all those dumbass jokes J.D. Vance was making? About, well, I guess the fishermen aren't going to go out in the water. I looked at this for my article, and J.D. Vance was making jokes and laughing about the fact that people in the most impoverished country on our side of the planet, where they have 80% of the people live under the poverty level, 50% of those, and then 50% live under the severe poverty line. That those people who make $100 a month, that now they can't go out and go fishing. And Trump said the same thing. I wouldn't go fishing either. So again, I wanted to write that article in a way to make a point about, is this terrorism? Is this coercion? Is this using violence to coerce people illegally? Do we need to look in the mirror and be reflective about that? And I don't know. There's good evidence for that. It's just something to think about, how this campaign is actually starting and what is happening here. Now, yeah. All of this, we haven't really gotten any updates from Congress. But again, here's more reporting that the Armed Services Committee was not notified about these operations. Okay. So we go back here. Yeah, more confirmation of, looks like we have ground troops in there, man. Another consideration for this, something to consider. I think, again, as I said, Venezuela's not going to fight back toe to toe, force upon force. They're going to wait for a ground invasion and try to hide their people. But there are a ton of expatriates living in Venezuela, Central, South America, Mexico. Let me just look at this real quick. That are subject to being kidnapped. There's already 5 that have been detained for allegedly being involved in drug cartels, but drug trafficking activity. But that's a vulnerability that we have. That's how they would fight back. Okay, so there's 23,000 American citizens registered. This is, I don't know how, this is not super up to date. This is about 10 years ago. So it's probably more than that now. 23,000 U.S. citizens are registered with the U.S. Embassy in Venezuela. So, again, Colombia used to be, it still is, a haven for kidnapping of Americans and Westerners. And it's pretty much impossible to track those people in those dense jungles. So, something to think about. Okay, so it looks like we've got some here. We have some potential bombings of the headquarters, command and control. I can't think of the word right now for it. The General Command of the Army, Strategic or Operational Command, and the Ministry for the People's Power of Defense. I see people looking at this, and I'm like, if they had anybody in those buildings, they're insanely stupid. Okay. Geolocated. Sorry, I couldn't think of that. Here we got some more. It's a big warhead. This is on this video I put out earlier. So watch these layered explosions. So right in the middle of your screen right now. Boom, 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 boom. Right on top of each other. There we go. These are like literally right down the same hole.
Vamos bien.
None of these targets are surprising, by the way. I mean, they should have seen this coming for months. These are the exact targets going to hit command and control, presidential, executive buildings. Anything associated with steam power, oil refineries, oil tankers, oil tank facilities, logistical supply depots. I mean, this is so obvious beyond belief that this was going to happen. So if they didn't plan for it, I mean, that's okay. All right. Okay, so here we go. So we got anything from Reuters. The Pentagon is silent about the operations. Venezuela told us about it first. It's not too unusual. All right. All right. Okay, looks like, here we go. Nicolas Maduro has been captured and flown out of the country. They must have had intelligence on him exactly. This, and that would have precipitated this. This is from Donald Trump is announcing that Nicolas Maduro has been captured and flown out of the country along with his wife. The operation was done in conjunction with U.S. law enforcement. Interesting. Details to follow. There will be a news conference. Okay, so there we go. Now, he has a warrant for his arrest. This is really no different from the capture of Manuel Noriega, who was convicted beyond a reasonable doubt, got due process by a jury. So there we go. Somebody just made $50 million. Extraordinary. You know, as well, yeah, somebody probably gave him up. The question now is, what is the next step? Got it. They got his wife too. I don't know. I don't know how he gets along with his wife. It's just, that's some people are like, oh, I don't want to bring her along. Okay, I'm just being funny a little bit here. All right. So what we have here is the next thing. Oh, also, I forgot the other thing that absolutely obliterates Trump's claim that this was a that there's a counter narcotics issue, component and motivation behind these mass murder campaign in the Caribbean is that the former Honduran president brought 500 tons of cocaine into this country, and he got out. So there's basically a pay for play scheme. It's pretty well documented. I believe in the New York Times. It's about $1 million per. Not that money's necessarily going directly to Trump, but for lobbyists and others like Roger Stone were able to get people close to the president can get pardons. It's like the going rate is around $1 million. We got to do something about that, but that requires a constitutional amendment. I will say this, a little bit even more humiliation for the Russians. I mean, they tried to grab Zelensky and do all this, but they're completely unable to. I mean, if you look at the difference between the U.S. military and the Russians, I mean, they carried out that strike in Iran. A lot of the fissile material may not have been blown up. However, it was still a pretty extraordinary mission to fly all the way from Missouri to Iran and back, and to do that complex operation with, knocking out the air defense, having the probably EA-18 Growler, electronic warfare airplanes come in and clear the way. B-2s come overhead, drop those bombs right down the shaft of that facility that accurately and come back. And then now they have this operation where, going in and body snatching a head of state in a country like Venezuela that's been very resistant to change is, we'll see what happens. We'll learn more. But so far, that's a relatively impressive operation. I doubt the president is, I don't want to say I doubt that he's lying, but if he's saying this and coming out and making this statement, they probably do have him in custody. Now, okay, so there we are. What are the next steps? What's going to happen? This is something I've looked at extensively. Like I said, this may be the easiest part of this regime change that we saw tonight. The things that made Maduro unpopular and the things that have caused this country to be in collapse are not going to be solved overnight. And the people we need to rebuild the institutions of Venezuela have been scattered across the world. This is where USAID comes in. This is where the State Department comes in. I'll tell you a little story about people like Data Republican and Elon Musk and others and their dismantling of USAID and what it did. Personal story about somebody I know who suffered from that. I knew somebody, really awesome, wonderful person whose family was stuck in Mariupol for 65 days while they're out of the country on business. They come back and, they barely got out. It was like the grandmother, 85 years old with cancer, mother, brother and his girlfriend, like 2 dogs, 2 cats, had to bribe the Russian soldiers to get out. They finally get to Kyiv, and my brother's all fighting in the military. And so my friend had decided, was able to get a job with the United Nations, with a United Nations related organization in Warsaw, Poland. And this is somebody also who lost their home in Donetsk City, earlier on, after 2014. Lose their home in Mariupol. Family is in Kyiv getting bombed every night. And they're in Warsaw working on refugee resettlement. brutally, emotionally, very difficult work. But like saving lives, like legitimately, working 14 hours a day, helping people all around the world, like true refugees, not white, white Afrikaners, not people like Lauren Chin who are straight up Russian assets who get, a special ability to come into this country. We're basically not letting anybody into this country right now, whether it's asylum, immigration, or anything else. And after being through all this, because USAID got closed down, they lost their job helping other people and had to go back to Kyiv to get bombed every night. That's what the closure of USAID did, among other things. And that's not even close to the toughest story. Go look at some of Nicholas Kristof, some of his writing for the New York Times, if you want to understand. I mean, like, imagine just if you've ever been in a neonatal ICU, all over Africa, there's all kinds of babies dying because we told them to rely on us, and then we pulled the rug out. And not just shut it down over time, but like rip the rug out and kill people. So that's how bad that is, just in like a small little window. And then you think about, okay, well, now we're going to need these people to rebuild it, help rebuild these institutions. How does these 30, 40, 50,000 doctors going to come back that have fled Venezuela? Who's going to do all this stuff? I mean, you've had the decay and the rot from, like, what about infrastructure? Vaccinations. They've had a lot of measles outbreaks in this area and in and around Venezuela, because you need to have like 95% plus inoculation rates to have effective defense against measles, and just all of these things. And so the hardest part is probably yet to come. If forces loyal to Maduro are able to melt away into the jungle, and again, there's a civil war or something of that nature, or rebel groups, again, that could complicate things, but it's real easy to go, I don't want to say easy, but it's, it looks flashy to go, to go grab Maduro and pull him out of the country, and claim, victory. But we've seen that story before. We've seen George W. Bush land on the aircraft carrier and declare victory, not knowing that, another 50, 70,000, 100,000 Iraqis and others were going to die. I'm not saying we murdered those people or anything, but again, the sectarian violence and all the instability, the failure to plan for the day after. The hardest part is yet to come by far. But still, it's still an incredible situation. Yeah. Now let's look at Nicolas Maduro's warrant for his arrest. I believe it's because it's drug trafficking, things of that nature. He's indicted by a U.S. federal court in 2020. Drug trafficking, conspiracy to import cocaine to the United States, $50 million reward. Okay. Now, let me see here. There's no current warrant from the International Criminal Court for torturing people and things of that nature, crimes against humanity. But yeah, it looks like. All right, let me see here. All right. There he goes. This is a good day for democracy. I mean, it's such a mixed bag, because it's good that he's gone, but the way we got there, it was committing murder. We'll see what happens next. And we don't know what the deal is also with Maduro, like what deal he struck. Is he going to get some kind of pardon? I mean, who knows? You can't put anything past Trump in this situation. I also have it on good authority for someone who's an expert in this area and worked in South America and in the Caribbean for a very long time, that multiple people, including someone who was actually going to be working in Ukraine, who had a lot of experience. But when USAID shut down, they had to turn around, come back. That having, based on their experience with the United States and having someone installed by virtue of violent regime change makes it more difficult for that person. But it's good for the replacement, Machado, to have a successful long-term status in that country as president or as the head of state. It would have been better for this to have looked more organic, as it may be. And again, what you're going to see is a bunch of people on the right, like, "Oh, Maduro's gone. You know, this is so base, such a great operation." Just remember Iraq, remember Afghanistan. Be measured, be calm. You know, this is not bad necessarily. This is a good thing that he's gone, but what could happen after this, and the instability that we've seen in this region, there's a lot of bad things that could still possibly be to come here. Really, truly incredible, though. What an operation. Who knows? Anything from Trump has a deal with this guy to like where Maduro bought some of his crypto and is actually going to get pardoned and then goes live in Russia with Assad. Like that's actually possible with Trump. To everything's above board and he's going to be prosecuted and put in prison. Who knows? And everything from on one end of the spectrum as to what could happen to Venezuela. Well, let's look at. I think something we should look at right now is how hard it is, what it's like to the state of the healthcare system in Venezuela right now, and specifically. Let me look. Actually, let's go back to this real quick because I've got this right here. Just want to confirm how many doctors have fled Venezuela the last 10, 15 years. The infant mortality rates are okay. So the estimated number of doctors who have left Venezuela, 42,000. It goes from anywhere from 42 to 50,000. Okay, so in the infant mortality rate, the maternal mortality rates, all of those things are double, triple, quadruple, or even higher than they are in EU nations and in the United States. There's one statistic that really fucking fucked me up when I thought about it, pardon my language, when I was looking into this for my article, is that, do you know what the second leading cause of death, and maybe it's the first or second, interpersonal violence. Okay, yeah. So it looks like, yeah, this interpersonal violence it's the second leading cause of death in Venezuela. Wow. So just like I mean, for like even other like nations in South America, Central America, that's not even like in the top 10. I wanted to show you guys real quick, just talk about just some more background on the Venezuelan healthcare system. Okay. I hope if this is a little bit of a difficult story. Childbirth in Venezuela, where women's death are a state secret. This is New York Times, so we'll go through this quickly, but this is something people should really know about, because this is like the people we should really, there's Trump, there's Maduro, but like the people really, these are the ones who have suffered the most, obviously, Over the course of 40 hours, Ms. Vasquez, a former high school athletic star, visited a second hospital, a third, and a fourth. We have no sterile tools, they told her at one. No incubator, they said at another. She took another bus. She slept on a bench. She cried in the street, losing count of the number of doctors who had placed their hands inside of her, measuring her body's dilation, only to tell her to leave. Finally, in Caracas, the capital, she stood up outside the largest maternity ward in the country and sent up a last desperate plea. Please, God, prayed, don't let me die. And about half the country's physicians, 30,000, have left in recent years. So similar numbers. Half? It's insane. The true impact of mothers and babies is unknown because they've stopped keeping statistics. Maternal deaths shot up 65% and infant mortality 30% in a single year. To understand what it's like to give birth in Venezuela in this shattered system, we followed pregnant women to 6 hospitals across the country and in Colombia. To give birth in Venezuela today is to risk death for both the woman and her child. This is really rough. Ms. Vasquez fainted, but the door opened, and about 48 hours after her labor pains began. Okay. For those of you listening, and I appreciate you guys being with me, because it's important. I've done a lot of work on this situation and understanding what's happening in Venezuela. And as always, my compassion and interest is with the people of that country, more so than the political issues. Imagine waiting 48 hours after, for those of you who have kids, 48 hours after your wife, mother, sister, whatever it may be, has labor pains, to go to the hospital to give birth. I mean, that's more than 2 days. Or that is about 2 days, yeah. Jesus. Her infant, born premature and tiny at just 3.3 pounds, didn't make it past morning. She pulled a white baby blanket from the pocket of her sweatshirt, one of her only memories of her daughter. Hospital officials had declined to give her a death certificate, and with no money for a burial, she had to leave her baby's body in the morgue. Here, she said, a woman is treated like a dog. For many Venezuelan women today, the defining feature of childbirth is the ruleta, meaning roulette, the grueling process that is traveling from hospital to hospital, trying to find one that is equipped to help them. They sometimes hitchhike or walk for miles or take buses over roads whose ruts and bumps seem designed to torture them. In rare cases, they are rejected over and over until finally giving birth in the street, in a hospital steps, or in its lobby. In some instances, the women die, and it's just like, there's that guy, unfortunately, the baby lived. Yeah. So these are the stories. Look at that. What you see on your screen, like that mother, these stories, that baby. She made his little head of hair into a mohawk. Super cute kid. Died 10 days later. That's what we need to think about. And our government has made it difficult. By the way, imagine that baby thousands and thousands and thousands of times over, all around the world, India, Africa, and places like closing USAID. Many, many, many more cases of that. Totally preventable, and closing USAID actually cost us money, didn't save us. At some point, the stupidity and malice, even in the context of closing down of what Doge did, from an intent perspective, that's murder. I mean, that's morally and ethically, God. Okay. So last awful thing we're going to talk about in this, just what people go through there in the medical system. This is a little difficult, so you may want to mute it if you're sensitive. Inside the delivery room at the public hospital in the city of La Victoria, Natalie Smith, 21, climbed onto a metal birthing bed one night, shaking and alone. She wore pink lipstick and had her hair in a ponytail. Blood was pooling on the floor below her. A list of missing items hung on a nearby wall. Soap, gauze, trash bags. Worms had invaded the hospital's vinyl recliners, so the beds had been banished to a nearby room. No soap in a hospital. No gauze. Not even any fucking trash bags. Worms in the chairs. Good Lord. This is some excellent reporting. Horrific, but it really brings it home. Oh, man. Okay, so there'll be a press conference tomorrow at 11 a.m. It's Eastern, so 8 Pacific, 9 Mountain, 10 Central, 11 Eastern. I think Mar-a-Lago's in the Eastern time zone, I'm pretty sure. There's going to be a lot of chest thumping by Pete Hegseth and others. Again, who's going to fix those worm-filled chairs? Because if they don't, this is just replacing one horrible situation for another. All right. Okay, so yeah. Understand too, I was a civil litigation attorney for, 12, 13 years. Last part of my career was doing class actions and, complex consumer protection stuff, but I've done stuff all over, all civil, done a lot of international law stuff as well. Conflicts of law, someone's injured at a resort in, say, Belize, and they took an American Airlines flight from Denver that landed in Mexico and then went there. And that resort's where they got injured is owned by a Texas LLC. What law applies? Texas, Colorado, Belize. I did a lot of that work and also getting jurisdiction into the United States. And I say that because Nicolas Maduro if he's going to be prosecuted, he's not. There's no grounds to prosecute him as be anything but a criminal court in the United States. So that's proof beyond a reasonable doubt. That's all the exclusionary rules of criminal procedure. Okay, so evidence illegally obtained, improper search warrants, things of that nature. As well, he's obviously a trial by jury. He's going to have access to the best lawyers, and he'll probably try to claim some kind of diplomatic or immunity or something of that nature. So, surely there's probably a lot of evidence against him, but those all come into consideration. All right, so now this is 2 hours ago, there was a NOTAM prohibiting all U.S. civil aircraft from operating at all altitudes in Venezuelan airspace. Well, honestly, like who the hell would have been, after what Trump said it was about 3 weeks ago, where he says, he did like a no-fly zone by tweet, where he said, the United States of America is, he's basically, don't fly in Venezuela. Any airline that was going to fly through there, I mean, that's a little bit reckless, I would think. And we had 2 near air-to-air collisions between U.S. aircraft flying over Venezuela, and one was a JetBlue. I forget what the other one was, but 2 American airlines almost ran into U.S. military aircraft over Venezuela the past several weeks. I wonder what it's like. Yeah. This is for... Oops. 2025 Bashar al-Assad, 2026 Nicolas Maduro. Hopefully Ukraine's going to win, but what happens to Putin, we'll see. That'd be a good one to get to. A better start to the year. The Venezuelan defense minister. This is 24 minutes ago. Let's see what this guy says. All right. Venezuelan defense minister talks like President Maduro wasn't just taken hostage.
Hoy, 3 de enero, el pueblo venezolano ha sido objeto de
I don't
la
speak
más
Spanish.
criminal
I'm not sure
agresión
what this guy's saying.
militar por parte del gobierno de los Estados Unidos de Norteamérica. Hasta el momento, la barbarie de las fuerzas invasoras que han profanado nuestro suelo sagrado en las localidades de Fuerte Tiuna, Caracas, los estados Miranda,
I understood
Aragua
Caracas.
y La
I should have learned
Guaira,
Spanish.
llegando a impactar
I
con
will
sus
still learn
misiles y
Spanish.
cohetes disparados desde sus helicópteros de combate
Darvinson
en
Rojas
urbanismos
Sanchez.
de población
His name's so much
civil
cooler than mine.
para la
Even though he's certainly a jack off working for Maduro. Now, here we go. We got Donald Trump. Maduro doesn't want to fuck around with the United States. This is October 2nd, and this is on the Rapid Response 47 account. You know, that's the kind of attitude, that's the kind of lack of humility. You're going to fucking walk into a buzzsaw one day of reality. I promise you that. These guys, see, this is the shit that concerns me. You know, hubris in the use of force in the government of this country, that's a dangerous thing. Shit. All right. Then we've got Iran. Here's Nicholas Kristof. This guy right here. He is a must follow for sure. Incredible images out of Iran tonight. This one from the eastern city of Mashhad. Several young protesters kneel in peaceful defiance of security forces. You know, like that can be so incredibly powerful. It can really break down. We saw that in the Civil Rights Act and the Civil Rights Movement with Martin Luther King. Is how emotionally this breaks down. You know, like the people opposing you. But man, what a world right now. If we can get Syria and Iran, finally defeat Russia. But again, like, this is so complicated. It's not happening because of Trump. It's happening in spite of him. Okay. Let me see here. Anything else we got going? Look at this fucking shit right here. Greatest president of all time. What a jackass. Fucking jag off. I'm sorry. I got to cuss when I see stupid shit like that. All right. Exactly. The real 3-hour operation, Putin must be fuming of jealousy right now. That's exactly what we were talking about earlier. All right. Okay, so look. This shit is objectively funny. The dead VDV from Hostomel seeing the U.S. conduct a successful 3-hour heliborne special operations mission. Yeah. Okay. So, a lot has been happening. All right. This is a funny comment. It's funny, of course, how Venezuela, which supports the Russian invasion of Ukraine, is now complaining about a U.S. invasion and asking for help. Well, you yourself previously agreed that it's possible. And if it's possible for us, it's possible for you too. Perfect. Yeah. Yeah. And also, like, special operations forces and the intelligence community. Think about also, when you're looking at these people, there was a recent story, that I think it was New York Times, I believe, about how we have this like fractured, chaotic situation in our government. Like we have like complete ass clowns in the White House, and in large part Hegseth and his team and so forth. But the CIA has remained, to his credit, the director of the CIA has let his officers continue giving intelligence to the Ukrainians, and they've helped architect this campaign against the oil refineries. And they use this doctrine called Carver, which is basically find something that your enemy needs and that it's difficult to reproduce in order to cripple his war machine. And what they did is there's specific items within the oil refining and gas refining process, like the distillation sack, and there's others that the CIA identified that Russia lacked the capacity to make. You know, they've been able to get around a lot of the sanctions by, you know, buying electronics parts from China, or shit-ass companies like Texas Instruments still somehow finding their parts into Russian cruise missiles. That's a whole other story. So the CIA found that part that they needed, helped construct an operational plan to take out these oil refineries by attacking that specific thing they needed and could not replace. And so understanding kind of the whole complex mosaic of our government and how, I mean, Trump is clearly says some awful, horrible stuff. He has some sociopathic tendencies for sure, like blaming Ukraine for getting invaded. You know, some of the stuff he says about Zelensky behind the scenes. Also, it turns out that catastrophic Oval Office disgrace meeting with Zelensky where they were disrespecting him, that happened because of Steve Bannon called in to Trump beforehand, and you know, it was like saying basically that that meeting was going to go a completely different way than Steve Bannon, who is a horrible person and a piece of shit based upon people who I know who know him personally. In addition to everything we see publicly, he stole from a charity, and then co-opted a veteran who was like missing limbs and stuff, and who ended up having to go to prison in his wheelchair, while Steve Bannon basically didn't. That's the build the wall scam. That all happened because he called into the meeting before that Oval Office situation and basically turned it another way and convinced, you know, Trump and Vance and all them. Although Vance probably didn't need much convincing. That's, you know, the kind of the story behind the scenes. But when you put all that together, you know, got those bad parts of the government, but then you have others that, you know, still have a soul, still have a spirit, you know, still like have a conscience and, you know, support Ukraine. So the intelligence community, and the intelligence community here, again, being able to locate Maduro, you can't have that special operations mission without exquisite, timely intelligence. Whether it's, I'm sure it's a combination of human and otherwise, but still, like, this is fantastic. Yeah. So probably the most essential piece of this operation are the same ones that have been able to compartmentalize themselves away from the dark forces in the Trump administration and continue helping the Ukrainians. All right. I don't know. I you know, there's going to be a lot of funny jokes over the next few days. And Darth Putin, I told my generals that this is what a special military operation is supposed to look like. They're both looking nervously at the window. But we're also going to have some nauseating MAGAs being like, oh, this is so based, blah, blah, blah. Not thinking about all the other issues that could happen. Yeah. All right. Well, looks like it's 3 a.m. Nicolas Maduro is no longer president. Who's next? We will see. Okay. Okay, so here we have Venezuela breaking 12 minutes ago. Vice President Delcy Rodriguez is now speaking by phone. So she has not been taken by the Americans. Now, again, this is what I'm talking about. If Maduro's power structure stays in place, That's not really. If we just get Maduro and there's no actual change, that's some like figurehead bullshit that doesn't really change anything. Okay, like obviously Nicolas Maduro is not the one. Assuming if you like assume like everything that Trump says is true. Oh, he's a narco terrorist. He's trafficking drugs, cartel of the sun. Again, which is probably bullshit because they waited most of the year before they did all these designations of a foreign terrorist organization, cartel of the sun, and all these. I mean, it's like 10 months. And the same thing with the tankers. Why did they take the tankers earlier? They waited 10, 11 months to do it, a year almost. Anyways, if all that shit is true, then the entire framework that enabled that, okay, it's not Maduro out there like putting drugs in the boat. It's not Maduro out there like stomping on the coca leaves, okay. It's everybody else in the apparatus underneath him. This is like, again, one of the things to be concerned about. Nothing will change if it's just a replacement. All right, this is important. Okay. This is super interesting. Yep. Well, let's see here. Spravdi, this is the Ukraine's strategic communications, a supporter of all things Russia, including the invasion of Ukraine. Venezuela's Maduro regime has been toppled by a U.S. military operation in far less than 3 days. To understand, again, just getting Maduro doesn't do shit. It does something. I mean, something. Figurehead and all that gets him out. But if we just continue and there's no transition to democratic rule, but that's not something we're going to know quick, I don't think. All right. Right. There's a lot we don't know. The operation appears to have been executed very quickly, which raises the question, was it arranged? Could be, or maybe not. We won't know. Anything's possible with Trump. I think the lesson from right now, and we're about to jump off the stream here because it's like 3 a.m. I was supposed to go to bed early tonight, but that's okay. We will not know the success. There's a lot of, I'm put it this way, there's a lot of unanswered questions. Things to look for is the framework under Maduro just going to stay in place? We've seen his vice president and his minister of defense still talking to the media like they're still in power. Okay. Is there any kind of transition plan or communications with the Trump administration? Or was it just, one Venezuelan general making $50 million and being able to leave the country? What's going to happen with Maduro? Is he going to be prosecuted criminally? Is he going to get a pardon? I mean, who the hell knows? And just finally, I think, what is the plan, if any, to help rebuild the institutions of Venezuela that created the situation with a woman traveling around for 48 hours trying to find a place in an urban area full of medical centers to give a baby? What's going to be done to fix worms in the chairs and the lack of soap in the fucking hospitals in Venezuela? Because if that is not going to be fixed and there's not a plan, which I doubt there is right now, this is just going to be a rotating situation. It's not going to improve. But overall, good for the people of Venezuela, possibly. Don't get too high, don't get too low. MAGA is going to be masturbating all over this for like the next couple of days. But against that, there'll be a lot of Ukrainian humor about the guy who loved Putin, getting snatched out of the country. That'll even out. All right, I'm going to jump off the stream, guys. Thanks for watching. DM me or whatever with questions. If you have anything, I like talking about this stuff and dorking out on it. So it's really important. Take care. Have a beautiful night. Glory to the people of Venezuela and for their future. Glory to Ukraine and to the cause of freedom and democracy across the world.